Hey family, it's Pastor Jen, and it has been super exciting to bring Theology in 30 to our Hope TV family. Just a little history, I've been sharing this each episode. Theology in 30 was birthed in 2018, had a couple of shows on Instagram, a couple of shows on Facebook, and I want to thank our executive producer, Dr. E. Dewey Smith Jr., and our marketing and media Hope TV family. I want to thank you all for allowing me to share Theology in 30 on our Hope TV network. Listen, Theology in 30 came out of my desire to encourage and engage in theological discourse with my friends, colleagues, family, and people who are just curious about theology and preaching and sermons. So this show is exciting in many, many ways. I also want to thank our supporters. Many of you have been with us since 2020, and we want to thank you for your viewership. And so you know what I need you to do. I need you to engage us in the comments. Tell me who you are. Tell me where you're watching from, because we want to shout you out and let you know how much we appreciate you hanging out with us on Theology in 30. Finally, we will be accepting questions. Yes, tonight, live. While you're watching, if you have any questions for myself or Dr. Russell, we will do our best to answer them real time. It'll probably be me answering them real time. And so please, 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 we want you to engage us on Theology in 30 tonight. In addition to that, follow us on Instagram at The Hope TV and share. You already know, share this link on all of your social media platforms so that other people can participate in this dialogue with us, so that other people can talk with us. So let's get into it. With so much controversy over critical race theory and the place of cultural interpretation in preaching and teaching, I think that preaching today, it must address the problems of racism and liminality in our culture and society. But unfortunately, African American biblical hermeneutics, which is what our episode is about tonight, is not always seen as an important discipline for preachers and theologians in many spaces. So tonight, I need you to turn to your neighbor and say, tonight, we have one of the most highly sought after Hebrew Bible scholars in the country. I'm going to say it again. We have one of the most highly sought after Hebrew Bible scholars and just scholars in general in the country. We have with us Dr. Kimberly Russell. She's a Spelman sister. Shout out to all the Spelman women who are watching. Let me know if you're a Spelman woman. Let me know in the chat if you're watching. Dr. Russell holds a PhD in religion from Vanderbilt University. She's the author of Daughters in the Hebrew Bible, one of my favorites, and Revisiting Rahab. She holds a Master of Business Administration degree, which prepared her for a successful career in consumer marketing at Fortune 500 companies such as the Ford Motor Company, Nabisco Incorporated, and the Coca-Cola Company. But God led her in a different direction. She is named one of 6 Black women at the center of gravity in theological education. She's an ordained itinerant elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. She's an inductee into the prestigious Martin Luther King Jr. Collegium of Scholars at Morehouse College. She holds membership in many, many more professional organizations, including, I gotta say it, the Society of Biblical Literature, the American Academy of Religion, the Society for the Study of Black Religion, and the National Black, or rather MBA Association, the National Black MBA Association. So listen, I can go on and on and on, but I want to get her on so that she can talk to us and share with us tonight. On Theology in 30, we are blessed to have one of my mentors, my African American biblical hermeneutics professor last year. Join me in welcoming Dr. Kimberly Russell. Say hello to everybody tonight.
Jennifer, if they invite me anywhere, I got to say I need 2 tickets because I need Jennifer Carner to introduce me. So Pastor Jennifer, thank you so much for the invitation. I'm excited to join you in this innovative work that you're doing with Theology in 30. When I received the invitation, I said, well, this is nice, but technically I'm a biblicist. I'm not a theologian. So it'll be interesting to see how our conversation evolves. And I'm looking forward to the different places that it might take us this evening.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want you to speak from your perspective as a biblicist. So let me start by saying I was already sold on the importance of, and for the purposes of this conversation, I'm going to say AABH, but we know that to be African American Biblical Hermeneutics, right? So
Sounds
I
good.
was already sold on the importance of AABH, but when you brought Randall C. Bailey to our
Yeah.
class, I was almost in tears. And a few of my classmates were almost in tears because after hearing him speak, I'm asking the question, what is Black preaching without AABH?
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I want to
Mm-hmm.
hear you talk a little bit about what AABH does for preaching because you're a preacher. I've heard you preach,
Yeah.
and and listen, you are somebody's preacher and a biblicist. So, what in your method, in your preaching and your homiletical theory, what does
Mm-hmm.
AABH do for your preaching?
Yeah. Um, so I think that the best way to answer that question is twofold. Yeah, on a very macro level, for me, I think things like African American biblical hermeneutics and womanist biblical interpretation as methodological approaches to in investigating the biblical text serve as wonderful companion partners for Black preaching.
Yes.
I, I think that biblical studies should serve as a pet companion for preaching, but absolutely African American biblical hermeneutics and womanist biblical interpretation should be in conversation or be dialogue partners with those who are particularly engaged in the work of Black preaching. That's A.
Oh,
Um, okay.
no, keep going. Keep going.
Oh, I thought you said hold on. Okay. And then my second point would be some of the presuppositions of African American biblical hermeneutics, I think, work well in the preaching moment and the preaching preparation. One, that we hold this text to be sacred, meaning that there is a group of people, a community that has decided that this book, these writings, are special, unique, and different for them as it relates to their faith life, their faith story. A. B. I see it's been my experience that many times when people come to the biblical text, especially those who consider that text to be sacred, they come looking to find themselves. And
Mm,
historically, those who have done the work of unraveling, exegeting, commenting on this sacred text have not come looking for the same thing because
mm,
they historically have not had the same shared experiences that those of us from the African diaspora have had. And so with that in mind, and then some particularities about my personal history, I think I come to the text or come to the work of investigating the text sensitive to or issues of power, issues of othering or marginalization,
yes, Lisa.
issues of
Yes,
justice that are relevant for my community.
absolutely. You when you said othering, I almost jumped out of the screen. I almost knocked the iPad down because I'm thinking Lisa Thompson. And I'm
Yes, 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 yes.
Yeah, this whole idea of othering shows up in so many places and spaces. Why not in our sermons? Let's talk about it.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
there may be some newbies. There may be some newbies watching who want to know what is African American biblical hermeneutics. So I know because I got the syllabus, but you tell us in just one short
Sure.
summation, what is AABH?
Sure. So if I were to sum it up in what's it, when you talk about the elevator speech, African American biblical hermeneutics is that form or that approach to biblical exegesis or biblical interpretation or investigation that takes seriously the concerns of Black people, those of the African diaspora. Methodologically, different exegetical methods are deployed in order to do this work. But at the center of it all is something that has to do with Black people. That's what's
Love it.
driving the work.
What's up, everybody? This is Jason Claiborne, and you're tuned in to Tea and Worship with my sister Mignon and my brother Chris and Corey on Hope TV.
Father God, who is Chris?
Did I make up a name?
He said 3 hoes.
Oh,
He said 3 people.
Chris, where you at, Chris? Chris. Let's do it again. Oh my God. What's up, everybody? This is Jason Claiborne, and you're watching Tea and Worship with Mignon and Corey on the Hope TV. All right, I don't know where Chris came from. Bless all the Chris's in the world right now.
Severe weather can strike anytime, anywhere, but there's a simple way to stay safe. Hey, Jim Cantore here. I stay safe in dangerous weather by planning ahead. You can stay safe too with a few easy steps. Build an inexpensive kit with supplies for your family's needs. Write down important information like phone numbers and medications. Always talk with your family, and remember any pets in your planning. Be ready, be safe. Start your plan today at ready.gov/plan.
Now let's cook.
Let me add this part for your audience. When I say different methods may be used or deployed, so here I'm talking about somebody might engage historical critical methods. Somebody else might engage narrative criticism. Somebody else might deploy the tools of ideological criticism. Somebody else might be concerned with the issues of the issues of rhetoric and how the words and phrases and symbols and images that the biblical writer chooses to use are done so in order to persuade the reader in a particular way. Yeah.
So to quote Dr. Andre Johnson on the heels of your last statement, for those of us who are working with both Black preaching and sacred rhetoric, we quote Andre Johnson when he says that Black preaching is inherently theological and rhetorical. And
that
he
makes
talks
sense.
about he talks about this whole idea of rhetorical theology. But I want to go back to your definition of AABH and ask the question about scholarship trail, because a lot of people are just hearing about this for the first time. And so for me, what was most helpful was to hear the thinkers in this line of scholarship that contributes to the field of African American biblical hermeneutics. And I'm not going to spoil it for them. I'm going to let you give us some of those key scholars. What are some key scholars that we should know, names we should know, if we're interested in this whole discipline of AABH?
Sure. I want to, in answering this question, acknowledge that when we talk about African American biblical hermeneutics, we're really talking about a work that is centered in the academy.
Yes.
But I also want us to be very clear that Black people have been interpreting this text long before they had access to the academy. Full stop. So your grandmother, your great-grandmother, those who we probably will never know their names, but encountered the biblical text, were trying to make meaning of it long before perhaps literacy, and then
Yes.
access to the academy. Callahan's book, The Talking Book, talks about or speaks to how Africans who had been enslaved on this continent engaged that biblical text long before they were even given access to the English language and definitely to literacy. But when we start talking about African American biblical hermeneutics in the academy, some of the names that you cannot have a conversation about African American biblical hermeneutics without including Dr. Charles Cofer.
Yes.
Cofer was the first Black person to earn the PhD in Old Testament. And Cofer's project was all about identifying Black presence in the Bible. Cofer comes along and says, all of this is wonderful, but hey, wait a minute. When we're talking about a Black person, however you want to, we're going to talk about conscript the word Black. They're Black people. When we say Egypt, we're talking about Black people. And that had not been done before he got on the scene and started doing that. Shout out to the Interdenominational Theological Center, where Cofer was a professor and a member of the faculty there the administrative team for a good long while. So a lot of his work was done right there in Atlanta, off of MLK Drive. So on the Hebrew Bible side, we come by way of Cofer. We also talk about, we're going to talk about Randall Bailey in a moment, but you've got people like Randall Bailey who come along, Kane Hope Felder on the New Testament side who comes along, and Felder starts to tease out or nuance or investigate. When we say Black, what do we mean? How is race taken up in the biblical world? That was an important contribution to the field. Bailey then comes along and says, we accept the fact that Black people were in the biblical world and are here in the text. Bailey's first set of questions had to do with, but what are they doing? To what end? How are these writers using these Black people, Black figures, Black, even some motifs, some turns of phrases to signal certain things? Bailey, coming off of Bailey, I'm not going I'm not going to be able to call the roll. I would not presume to do so. I will leave it to people like, I'll give you a reference. Michael Joseph Brown wrote a book called The Blackening of the Bible. In it, he starts to trace some of this work of scholarship. But if we're talking about African American biblical hermeneutics and Black people, and not necessarily parsing out womanist work, you have to talk about Clarice Martin and Renita Weems, because actually I'm calling the roll of the people who were in Kane Hope Felder's edited volume, Stony the Road, We Trod African American Biblical Hermeneutics. Many of those thinkers are it's upon their shoulders that many of us do our work today. And that thing was published 30 years ago. So that gives you a sense of A, how new we are to the Academy, but B, how rich and the work still that still exists is, or how broad, or there's so much work that's still left to be done.
So let's talk about revisiting Rahab.
Okay.
You know that in this conversation, we're going to talk about this whole idea of dealing with difficult text. That's coming a little bit later. But I want you to share with our audience what made you decide to write this. I'm talking about monumental work. I had an opportunity to present on the first version. And I was blown away because I was like, I never thought about this. Rahab could be passing in the Bible.
Yeah.
So what made you decide to ask these questions of the text? I mean, I thought it was remarkable.
Sure. So in my first work, Daughters in the Hebrew Bible, I define daughter as that female member of the household who is not yet a mother. In the biblical world, it almost seems as though someone becomes a wife and then 30 minutes later she's begetting somebody. So wife wife and motherhood go really, really close together. So I can say the female member of the household who is not yet a mother. And as I was doing my work, at some point I had this long list of all the people who count as daughters. And look for a low, low price on Amazon. You can read the book and learn all that stuff. But as I was going through, a couple of characters struck me. Rahab counts as a daughter because she's a female member of the household, and there's no indication that she has any children. So I kind of put a footnote on that. I've been thinking about that Rahab person. Then as I'm thinking and doing my work and dealing with women in the Bible, I was struck by the fact that what we call the conquest narrative is a critical or pivotal moment in the history of Israel, or in the arc of the story of Israel and its God. You've got the Torah, then you move into the historical books and so forth. But you got to get them into the land of promise before you can have a monarchy, before you can go into exile. Then we're going to have a little other period there. And then we're going to show up in the first century and a baby is born in a manger, right?
Yes.
But it seemed to me that whole Joshua 6 narrative can't happen without this female character. She's the fulcrum on which this whole thing balances, or she's the center upon which this whole thing works. They have to get into Canaan by way of Jericho, and there has to be some sort of a way for these Israelites to know that this is the place to know, yes, we can take this, we can conquer, we can go to war and win. Basically, we can root these people out, and this is the land of promise. Said differently, in many ways, there are ways to read that text that says, were Rahab not there, how would that have gone down? If we understand that Joshua's story really serves as like a parallel to Moses's story. Remember back in the Torah, there was a situation where some spies were sent out to look at the land. Yes. And they come back saying, oh, they're these big giants, we can't do it. And two of them say, we can do it. Caleb and his running buddy come back and say, we can do it. You see the same thing happening in the book of Joshua. This time they send out two spies, and those two spies end up at Rahab's house. There's a negotiation that takes place, and then the next thing you know, in Joshua 6, here come the Israelites with all of their military force, and Joshua, the ever ethical military leader, says, hey, didn't we make a promise to somebody? Let's go make good on our commitment, because we are people. We're ethical people. Our God keeps God's promises. Therefore, as people of this God, we keep our promises. Rahab and her family are saved, blah, 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 blah. Rahab is the only character who gets named in the story. Mm-hmm. She is a female who has dialogue with men that are of a different social status to her.
Right.
And quite honestly, she manages the fellas like Will Gaffney talks about Delilah, don't hate the player, hate the game. In many ways, Rahab is playing the game better than the folk who seem to be in charge of the game in the Joshua story. Yeah. So all of that made me really interested. You asked how I came to the book. And so I had this bright idea that I was just going to write. I thought it would be cool to write a series of essays on this character that people read over. They're important, but people know about Rahab, but nobody's really paying close attention to her. And my plan was to write a series of essays by using different exegetical methods. So there's an essay that's using rhetorical criticism. There's an essay that's a womanist read. There's an essay that's taking up some historical. And then when I got it all together, my editor said, okay, this essay idea is cute, but really what we can weave this thing together as not necessarily disparate essays, but chapters in the book, and there you have it.
So I can't add anything to that. I'm not going to try.
When will someone know that they need a coach?
If you're looking at your life and you're taking an evaluation of yourself and you're not happy with where you are and you can't seem to come up with what you need to do to become happy, then, you know, a life coach may be that individual that you need. Now, if you're just having a rut, just, you know, a week at a time, and you can kind of talk yourself out of it or you get over that, you may not necessarily need a life coach. But when you are really stuck and you've tried this and you tried that and it's not working for you and you just feel like you need more, then I definitely believe that a life coach would be someone that you can reach out to.
In the society that we were brought up in, it's very hard on little black boys. You have to navigate feelings and emotions so the world don't get you.
Sometimes when I cry, I won't know how I'm feeling or why I'm crying.
I just grew up never feeling like it was okay to cry.
Yeah.
And so he really forced me to have to reconnect with the kid that didn't get to cry.
That's beautiful.
We don't cry. We gon' take our piece of the
You know, I was one of those Baptist babies born on the pew who remember songs like "So Forget About Yourself," "Concentrate on Him," and "Worship Him." It's hard to give the best if you physically are falling apart. So as a pastor, how do you reconcile that kind of theology with a theology of self-care?
The best gift that I can be to my congregation is to model it. God is concerned about every aspect of who we are. God created our mind. God created our bodies. Why would God create a mind, a body, a spirit, a soul, and tell us not to take care of it?
What I walked away from in reading, revisiting Rahab, and also reading The Daughters is that there is some biblical interpretive work that happens, especially when you're dealing with these texts, like you said, women, women who are not yet mothers, how you came up with the whole concept of the daughter in the biblical text. But to me, you are a master at dealing with texts that most people shy away from. Yeah. And so we participated in an activity with the class, Difficult Text in Hebrew Bible. And just the conversation and the experience was so vibrant. So I want you as a biblicist to talk to our viewing audience members who are preachers, who are teachers and scholars in one elevator speech. Share with us some good advice from a biblicist on dealing with difficult text from your perspective.
So I think a couple of things. We're using the term difficult text, but I want to nuance that and say unpopular text, because for me, one way to get at this is to approach this work with some ground shared understandings. My major shared understanding or presupposition going into this work is the text is sacred because the community has decided that the text is sacred. But that does not mean that the text is always set up for my well-being or healthy or espousing principles or concerns that work for me or members of my community. Quick case in point. When one child's life is in danger, you find a ram in the bush. But over in Judges, when the daughter's life, Jephthah's daughter, is put up for sacrifice, there is no ram in the bush. And so as a young woman sitting in the pews, let alone in the pulpit, how do I wrestle with when a boy's life is, when the son is in danger, there's a solution so the son doesn't die. But when the daughter's in danger, almost identical stories. When the daughter's in danger, there's not that same sort of resolution. How do I make that okay? I can't. How do I make Numbers 12 okay? When both Aaron and Miriam say, hey, Moses, you can delegate some of this work to us. We've got leadership skills too. We can do some of this.
Right.
Why is it that they speak in unison, but it's only Miriam who is punished? That doesn't seem to be okay. And then to me, the story even plays out or demonstrates her value to the Israelite community as a leader, in that the text says the people don't leave until Miriam returns to the camp. As if to say, we're not going until Miriam can come. She's that important to us. But that text by itself is not okay. It's sending messages on various levels that are harmful, can be harmful to certain listeners. And so if when I approach it that way, then that gives me permission oftentimes to read against the text. We're talking about the genealogy or something, the scholars who've come before us. I remember one time I was in Nashville and I was at Ray of Hope Church, and Reverend Dr. Renita Weems was preaching. And I cannot even remember the text she was preaching, but she starts out by saying, I wish this wasn't in the Bible. Mm-hmm. When I tell you those people were dumbfounded, and I said, you're absolutely right, because what she was getting at is we expect only good stories. We expect fairy tale like endings in everything that we find between Revelation. And so to have a harsh story, to have a sad story, to have a story that does not have an happy ending, or to have a story that makes you have to wrestle with your own understanding of who you are, perhaps, in the world. Weems gave us permission to say, you know what? You're right. There's something that's not sitting right with us about this. Let's go look at it now. And so those sorts of things help me have the liberty or the freedom or the permission to do the work of interrogating the text. And that's a lot of times when you interrogate an unpopular text or an unpopular treatment of the text, that's where it becomes a challenge, in that it's going to create some dissonance for the learner, for the hearer initially. But I believe that there's always something important that Spirit is showing us that we need to see, that maybe we need to be doing different. I am beyond enthusiastic that Dr. Erica Dunbar's book, Trafficking Hadassah, is now available, in which she really reads the Esther story as sex trafficking. And given the modern day concerns that we have, not right now, her encouraging us to look at this story differently should literally and figuratively set some people free.
So this is my least favorite moment on Theology in 30. We have actually exceeded the 30-minute mark. We're at the end of the show. But there's something I have to say on the heels of what you just shared. It sounds to me that what you're saying is the text may be unpopular, but God still has something to say through it.
Yeah, I agree with that. Absolutely.
Even if you as the preacher, or in some situations the rhetor, if you are having to read against the text, that's still an interpretive move, right?
Yeah. It's absolutely an interpretive move. And for those of us who are believers and understand that Spirit is working in the work that we do, sometimes there's an uncomfortableness of going places where you haven't been before, even though you know that's where you're supposed to be going. Pastor, you get up sometimes and you're like, I do not want to say this, and then afterwards, and it only really needs to be one person who says, you know what, what you said today really did resonate with me. And my life is going to be different tomorrow because of what I heard from you today. That's when you know you are, even though it was uncomfortable or difficult, it was right.
This conversation has been rich, and I dare not attempt to wrap this up and put a bow on it, and try to give concluding remarks. I'm going to let you speak for yourself, Dr. Russell. What concluding remarks would you like to share as we close out this episode of Theology in 30? What do you want to leave our viewers with? I'll just let you pick because you've given us so much already. So you just share whatever you'd like to share in closing, if you don't mind.
I think for this audience, Pastor Jennifer, is important, especially at the in this time that we're in, 2022. It's important to encourage people, to remind them that God is still speaking through Spirit in our work of study of this text. And so this whole idea of, read deeply, read critically, pick up your Bible and ask questions of it. Go try to find some answers to questions that maybe you've had, but you didn't think you could ask because it wasn't acceptable to ask a question. Be a fourth grader. Well, why are there two creation stories in Genesis? Wait a minute. Over here it says this, and over here it says that. Start doing that deep reading and journaling, and I think you'll be surprised at where Spirit will lead you. And there are those of us out here who've done a lot of the work to help you navigate those spaces. So read and cite Black scholars.
Listen, you're already you're walking in my backyard, of course, because my time in your class, your lectures have made it into my sermons.
Yeah.
And I've said, I guess it's a rhetorical move. I'll say, Dr. Russell helped me with this.
Amen.
In this,
Amen.
We're looking. So absolutely. See, Theology in 30 family, I told you tonight's show would be engaging and that it would be thoughtful, and it was. So I want to thank you, Dr. Russell, for talking with us today. We appreciate who you are to Black scholarship and who you are to the world. Thank you for agreeing to be on Theology in 30. That will conclude tonight. You're more than welcome. That will conclude tonight's episode. We are the House of Hope Atlanta. Dr. E. Dewey Smith Jr. is our senior pastor, and we believe that life with God is better in every way, every day. I hope to see you all next week. Until then, be well and be safe, family.